Welcome to the 18th episode of Season 3 of Shot Nostalgia, diving deep into WWF 1998. As always, live from No Sale Studios, I'm the ACEFIELD Tavern, ACEFIELD Retro. And as you can see, Mr. Solo Dolo tonight, but I am joined by the picture, what a beautiful picture that is, of Mike Belcaster, Sammy Guevara from Las Vegas. Mike is still getting his bearings straight from being on the road, getting all the breaking news for the figures at the Fan Fest, and he'll be returning next week as we break down Survivor Series 1998, but we'll set the table for it. We'll get ready to be there, and we're going to continue this dive deep into all the things you know and love about the Attitude Era. So as we talked about, we're going to be reviewing 3 Raws, no pay-per-view. We had two shows in a row that were pay-per-views, but this week, 3 events, the October 19th Raw, the October 26th Raw, and November 2nd Raw. So as we talk about from week to week, there is a lot to be said about the Attitude Era compacting all these beautiful moments into one beautiful package. And this week is no different. We have the emergence of the Hardcore Championship. We're seeing the emergence of The Rock as he's getting, seems like they're putting all the steam, all the eggs in this basket to become the ultimate babyface. But as we sit here on the go-home show before Survivor Series in our world, Shot Nostalgia 1998, we're getting ready to have the rug pulled out from under us and watch The Rock become the corporate champion. And it's like, you know, watching through and going back and watching this now that you know what's going to happen. It's like watching The Usual Suspects and going back to find clues. That's the beautiful part about this storyline here, is that they laid it out all for you. You should have seen it coming, but you didn't. And that's what the best part about this intricate storytelling is, that part. We can definitely tell watching through that The Rock was planting seeds all this time, even though the fans are getting behind him and understanding that he is going to be this super baby face that everyone's getting behind. But he will be that champion in only a short period of time. At this time, the youngest champion in the history of the WWF, and it's a huge deal. They knew exactly what they had in The Rock, and I mean, clear as day, he became everything and more of what they had from him. So it's a beautiful thing. And one of the best parts of the Attitude Era is this Survivor Series one-night tournament. And we know Vince McMahon has this feeling towards tournaments and one night, especially, in a negative way. And how could you not compare that tournament with the WrestleMania 4 one? And there's a lot of parallels that we'll talk about next week that continue to sit here. And WrestleMania 4 and Survivor Series 1998 one-night tournaments, the 2 times in the history of WWF, WWE that they did that. And I wonder if we'll ever see that again. But both I'm curious to see what Belcaster thinks the similarities between, you know, the Hogan Andre situation where they had them both eliminated. We have some situations that are comparable to that. But let's set the table for you. Let's first of all get to happy hour so we hear about what Dave Meltzer has to say in October of 1998.
Happy hour.
All right, here in the happy hour, and business is a booming. Everything with wrestling is going off the charts, and we're seeing the WWF logo pop up on things we've never seen it. We talked about Beanie Babies. We've talked about baby clothes. We've talked about even to the point where you throw Austin 316 on any item, it was a hot commodity going off the shelves. But the other big thing, aside from merchandise, is the house show business. And Meltzer says house show business is through the roof. This past week, WWF sold out 4 of its 5 house show dates, and we're told talking arenas besides Nassau Coliseum like Pittsburgh and Cleveland for regular house shows. And I was listening to the Something to Wrestle With episode leading up to Survivor Series 1998, and the house shows are quadrupling the business. And I think it was something like 97% up from the year prior. And that number is existing here. You can look at the gauge, you can look at the merchandise just to use as a barometer to see how popular professional wrestling is, not only on the WWF side, but on the WCW side. But the live gate here, it's been unbelievable to watch. And I think some of the conversation that Conrad and Bruce Pritchard were having was this conversation, especially as we move towards AEW adopting this house show schedule and working all these dates. And, you know, outside of the fact that you have to work these live dates, whether it be Raw on a pay-per-view, lower talent is running through doing the live wires, the shotgun Saturday nights, superstars, finding different ways to be on TV. But outside of it, for big stars like Stone Cold Steve Austin, he's on Regis Philbin. He's also on Letterman. He's doing radio spots on Howard Stern. He's all over the place, to the point where you would think the house show would be something that they're not looking forward to. But according to Bruce Pritchard and other people during that day, the payoff was a percentage of the gate. And if you're selling out these house shows to the limit that they are doing right now, people were clamoring to be on the house shows. They wanted to be on them because they're making a huge chunk of change. And, you know, some of the different talent, of course, Stone Cold gets a larger percentage of that because he is what people are paying to see. But for the most part, other talent, I mean, it's a big pool of money. And if you look through the pool of money and you get a certain percentage, even if you are a D'Lo Brown, where you're getting a smaller slice of the pie, it's still a large slice of the pie when you see the house show business is at a record level. So we'll continue to watch the house show businesses, and we continue to look at it right now in 2023 as a barometer to forecast where wrestling's going. And I think, honestly, the house show business with the Cody Rhodes stuff leading up to WrestleMania, that was a good barometer of how well some of these live events would do. And I know it's international, and we looked at, obviously, the Saudi show is going to do well, but going to Puerto Rico and all these other live shows leading up, they're doing well. And I think that's always a precursor to what big business will be doing as far as WWE side and leading up to it. And usually this is the downswing. You know, speaking 2023, we're here, you know, the Tuesday after Memorial Day. It's usually in the time between WrestleMania and SummerSlam that we have a little bit of a down period, but that's just not the case right now. And same thing here in October of 1998. There was not a down period at all. If anything, the business was getting hotter and hotter as we build towards the end of the year going into 1999. So we're talking about Jerry Lawler and Jim Carrey and trying to replicate the scenario that was happening with the Andy Kaufman situation, getting celebrities and blurring the line. And who better than Jerry Lawler to blur the line? He's made a career of it. But Meltzer says, according to Lawler, there's virtually no chance Jim Carrey is going to appear on WWF television or do pay-per-view appearances. Jerry Lawler is claiming everywhere to have not been in on the Carrey angle, although he believes it was an angle and that Carrey wasn't really hurt. And he believes Jim Carrey was looking for an excuse to wear a neck brace in public and fool people into thinking a fake injury was real, like Kaufman did after his confrontation with Lawler 16 years ago. They continue to talk about the history and the significance of the Andy Kaufman angle, which we all know. We can go in depth about that and understand the importance of it. But this also speaks volumes about Jim Carrey. I mean, he's one of the biggest movie stars at this time, is rubbing shoulders with wrestling for a guy who's not even active too. I mean, you got to remember Jerry Lawler is, you know, designated to the desk at this point, but he's still a huge star and kind of showing how it's transcending where the celebrities now want a piece of the pie a little bit to stay relevant. But I always wonder what could have happened if Jim Carrey at this point of his most popular status would be, at this point, I would say 1998, to have him involved in wrestling, because I think it would have a lot of legs here. Meltzer continues in here. He says, Lawler said that Carrey is not a wrestling fan. He claimed that Kevin Dunn and Vince wanted him to address the Carrey situation on Raw since it was such a big story, but the producers of the movie didn't want him talking about it. Kevin Dunn said to just say that he talked about it to Carrey's face if Carrey came on Raw, trying to build curiosity to the idea that Jim Carrey would appear on the WWF television show as a way to address the situation and not say anything about it. So we never got the payoff of this, and that kind of sucks because I think it could have had, like I said, some weight to it. We could be sitting here talking about Jim Carrey. I mean, we all know the comedy and how significant he was in his movies and how popular he was at the time, even today. But if you watch the Netflix documentary about Man on the Moon and see just how volatile Jim Carrey was at this time, and you hear about some of these actors that really channel the characters and want to get into the mode, this might have been the similar situation as this. So a lot of these guys that sit here and talk about Jim Carrey and want him involved in wrestling, there was a reason for it. It was being covered by Entertainment Weekly, Newsweek, Hollywood Reporter. This was a big deal in the world outside of wrestling. And that just says everything you need to know about it. I think this is why it was a big deal. And even if Jerry Lawler is telling the truth, and I'm not sure what else he has said about it in different interviews, but there was something to be said about Jim Carrey's behavior during this time. It was certainly troubling if you watch the documentary that came out. As I said, I think it came out in 2017, 2018, something like that. But they cover this and they have some footage of what was probably, not something that Jerry Lawler was in on, or apparently he was. Who knows? But I think they could have had something tangible that could have sold some tickets similar to the Andy Kaufman thing. But alas, it never worked out. But I think it could have been something special. we continue in the newsletter, and Vader's telling people that his WWF release doesn't have a non-compete clause to where he can't go to WCW. Vader worked all the house shows this past week, putting The Rock over. So we've been kind of teasing that Vader would be gone at some point. We talked about how disappointing his run in WWF has been. Trace it all the way back to his loss with Shawn Michaels at SummerSlam in 1996. Never really was the same since. They kind of piecemealed some of the last of the rub you can get off Vader with that Kane feud and No Way Out. But since then, he's been pretty much a lost cause. And we're going to see Vader go over to All Japan and work some of those matches and get some of the shine back on him. But I'm pretty sure, at this point, they do have a non-compete, and Vader's just unaware of it at this point because they didn't want him going over to WCW and being rehabilitated to the point where he could draw money. And we know that over on the Turner side, that Vader was a popular star. Vader was someone that they could rely on. And for whatever reason, it just never worked in WWF. Was it the presentation? Was it just something that Vince never got behind? Or was it just the fact that he was a little bit past his prime? I guess we'll never know. But if you watch some of the early 90s Vader in WCW, those matches he was putting on, even the post stuff in Japan, there was something there. It just didn't fit the WWF style at the time. And they didn't want to put the weight behind it. They didn't want to push him into the direction where he could be a big star. And it's interesting because they needed stars to go against Stone Cold and go eventually against The Rock. And these guys could have been pit stops there, but they never treated him as such. And, I know they were so loaded at the top of the card, so they really didn't need him to be there. And I think as we look at him in retrospect, we understand what could have been, but it didn't hurt them in the way that probably would have in different eras. But, we say goodbye to the Vader era in 1998. And for those that enjoy Vader, we never really got a taste of what he could give to the business on the WWF side. So we continue with the merchandise. Meltzer has said that Austin sells more t-shirts than any entertainer or sports figure in the world. And he said, I went out to a local amusement park on 10/11, which is a Sunday with no pay-per-view. And keep in mind the location, but in order, it was Austin t-shirts, followed by Michael Jordan jerseys, Steve Young jerseys, Jerry Rice jerseys, local martial arts stars, Kung Lee t-shirts, and exactly one NWO shirt. So if you take, and again, this is an imperfect survey, but if you think about and close your eyes, if you are a kid that's around the same age as I am at this point, think about your elementary school and the shirts you'd see. For me, it was Stone Cold shirts for sure, DX shirts, South Park shirts, things like that. And of course, the Michael Jordan jerseys were everywhere in 98. It's just the same way as the popularity of Michael Jordan and the Bulls at that point during their dynasty years. And it's interesting to see the Steve Young and the Jerry Rice jerseys as well. I mean, that's a little bit more telling of the area where he's from. I know that Meltzer's from like the San Jose area, so not too far off of San Francisco. But yeah, I mean, it just shows the popularity. All these Austin shirts everywhere. And we're sitting here and still talking about today. You still see the Austin shirts. That's the other amazing part. We have the December pay-per-view for Vancouver being labeled Rock Bottom. And Meltzer says, so that should get everyone speculating on Rock taking the title at Survivor Series. I'm curious if we have any anecdotes in here as we move forward about The Rock turning heel. Because at this point, I think everyone thought The Rock was going to win the title, but as a babyface. They were putting a lot of stock into The Rock as far as getting the momentum behind him and overcoming the odds and being sort of, the Macho Man to the Hogan as Austin's there. And I think a conversation can happen as far as the popularity goes. They took a risk on turning The Rock heel at this point because when you watch him on these Raws, he's getting the most significant reactions outside of Austin. People want to cheer him. But I think by turning him heel, similar to what they did with Roman Reigns, it allowed him to come into his own with the charisma. And you have to remember with The Rock, go back Survivor Series 1996 where he debuted, just how long it took him to get to the point where people wanted to cheer him. And if you were a wrestling fan at the time, it's only 2 years removed from the Die Rocky Die chants and just the happy-go-lucky rookie that's living off his father's name debuting, and people wanted no part of it. They didn't see it as authentic. To have him at the point where he's winning the title at Survivor Series It's amazing. 2 years is not a long time in wrestling, as we know. I mean, Roman Reigns has been champion for over 3 years. So a lot for Rock to have the growth and grow leaps and bounds from 96 to 98 and to be the champion says a lot. And I understand during this era, they're just bouncing the titles around. And we had the conversation about Ken Shamrock couldn't got a run with the title with the way they were bouncing it around. But just the fact that, The Rock was giving this ball essentially to run with in 1998 at the ripe old age of 26, 27 years old just didn't happen back then. It took, you used to have to pay your dues and go through the ringer. And he kind of did that. I mean, he had the run with the IC title, and that usually was our rites of passage to get to these main event slots. But they knew what they had in The Rock, the athleticism, the charisma. The more they gave him the freedom, the more he took it and ran. And it's quite obvious that the right decision was turning him heel. Really. I mean, I think people probably second guessed at the time with his popularity, but you could draw direct parallels to Roman Reigns. And when you finally allowed him to be himself, it's interesting because as the heel, Roman Reigns is so popular. He's probably the most popular wrestler in the company right now. But the same thing happened with The Rock. The Rock was already popular, but his charisma was taken up to another level when he had the ability to use that charisma as a heel, but also still people wanted to cheer. It was almost the anti-hero, but they got people to boo him because he was with Vince. Just fascinating. We also continue with The Rock. The World Wrestling Federation is really pushing to get Rock as the centerpiece of the new mainstream pub, including to get him on episodes of The Net and Silk Stockings on USA, which, can you imagine that The Rock had to struggle to get on these B-level shows when he is the most paid and most popular actor in the world right now? Silk Stockings probably would have killed to have him on at the time. But again, we all could see the future in this. And I think Vince McMahon and everyone behind the scenes in WWF knew just if you gave him a chance, give him the microphone, let him do it, he could run with and be the focal point in your company. I know there was a story for, I think it was I forget what magazine. I think it was the New Yorker. There was a magazine that was supposed to have, and it's not a newsletter, but I was listening to Bruce Pritchard talk about it. He was talking about this. They wanted to put, because there was a story about how popular wrestling was, and they wanted to put Stone Cold and Vince McMahon because of their rivalry. But Vince McMahon, and the story goes that because of kayfabe, he didn't want to be, because how could they be in the same room for a photo shoot? It didn't make any sense. So he was trying to convince the company, the magazine, to put The Rock on the cover with him. But they didn't want to do it because of the fact that they didn't think Rock was a big enough star, which is so funny to talk about now. So they negotiated. And so instead of The Rock, they had Taker. And even though Vince knew, I guess, the level of push he was going to get, the plan in place for The Rock, that by the time the magazine came out, he would be the champion, most likely. I just love that story that they just, Vince knew, like, he actually dipped his toe in the water. He can tell just how big a star The Rock was going to be, to the point where even though you have Stone Cold, Mount Rushmore level popularity on your roster, you're still cultivating this other star, carving him out of stone. I mean, The Rock is an appropriate term for this guy. It just shows how popular he was and how much trust they put in him. So I know a lot of negativity gets tossed around about Vince, but we have to give him some credit of recognizing trends and finding the right guy at the right time. He happened to have two of them in 98. And that also speaks volumes to how often do you have two franchise players? So many eras we talk about, there's usually a guy who's underneath a top guy, but arguably at this point, they're very much neck and neck. So we continue here. Told you we talk about house shows. We have 10-8 in State College, Pennsylvania, 6,925 people with 127,906 on a show without Taker or Austin. We also have 10-9 in Pittsburgh, drew a sellout of 15,784, paying 285,182. We have merchandise going on here for 404,583, or $6.86 a head. Just astronomical numbers being tossed around here. People want to see the product no matter who's there. Taker's on the card. Who cares? Austin's on the card. Who cares? Let's go and see wrestling. And even markets that weren't historically good markets were drawing huge numbers. So we continue here in the October 26, 1998 newsletter. And Meltzer says, behind all the analysis is a simple fact. Besides the obvious one about the current popularity, WWF television, for the most part, and 1019 was an exception, is far better than WCW. And 1019 did have shock value going for them. He continues, WCW has been living off its 1996, 1997 success to stay as close as it has, because most weeks the gap in quality is far greater than the gap in ratings. And more importantly, during WWF's hot period right now, they're using the period to develop new stars, while WCW largely squandered its hot period when it came to making new stars, with, of course, the exception of Goldberg. Meltzer says his character's lacking in depth, and he's in danger of being a flash in the pan. And he says, yeah, of course, DDP is a star, but he's 43 years old. So, man, looking at this, and obviously we know the result of all of this and what happens with WCW, their quick demise. They're only 3 years from completely going under, hitting an iceberg and going under, and everybody abandoning ship. But I think the writing was on the wall. And if you're watching wrestling at this time, and I know there's some WCW apologists out there, and I love WCW. I think they've created some great moments. At this point, I think the most accurate thing that was said in this whole newsletter was the gap in quality is far greater than the gap in ratings. And sometimes it takes a little bit of time to catch up. And as we know, the Monday Night Wars was a war of attrition. It took time to wear your opponent down to get to the point where WWF just was putting out quality after quality after quality storyline where fans were not tuning in on the other side because there's no reason to. And now with the coronation of The Rock coming up, it becomes too much. You got these stars that are younger, they're faster, they're more charismatic, and you're putting a lot more behind them. And WCW never really did that. If you look at what happened with them, there's the constant thread throughout WCW, and you can make the argument that, you know, who else could have been pushed there? And you can make the argument a guy like Chris Jericho before leaving in 99, just a year from now, he'll be on the WWF side because he wasn't given the opportunity to run. But I mean, you can even look at Eddie Guerrero that was there, and he'll, of course, be over on the other side as well in 2000. So there were guys that you could have taken and given the reins and got rid of the old guard. And I think that's what WWF was forced to do because WCW was paying guaranteed money. And that's the ironic part, is that WCW in the beginning got off to a really big head start by capturing and taking on all of the talent, the established stars on the WWF side. And here we are. Now they're paying for it because, and it's like the same thing with a sports franchise. You sacrifice the future and trade draft picks away, and you're not cultivating your whole team over and over again. That's why you look at teams, not to talk too deep into baseball, but you see the teams like the Rays and the Dodgers are constantly good because if a guy gets old or a guy leaves in free agency or a guy retires, there's another guy behind him who's just as good, if not better. And with the WWF, they were forced to rebuild. People had to sit through the new generation and sit there in 96. 97 was a great year, but there was still some rebuilding, some growing pains. And now you're paying off with franchise players all across the board. And you have guys that can take this, you know, if you get an injury, like a guy like Triple H, we're not even talking about Triple H because he's out with an injury. He's a top guy, and you're all competing on the same roster. It's just fascinating. So the other thing in the newsletter, and he talks about, is 4 hours too long or is the main event just bad? And he's talking about this from the pay-per-view on the WWF side. He said probably a little of both. There were some complaints stemming from the WWF's last pay-per-view from Hamilton, Ontario, that between the 1 hour of live Sunday Night Heat and nearly the 3 hour pay-per-view event, it was just too long. Meltzer says in theory and in practice, it should be a great deal to have 1 hour free television lead in so millions of viewers get to see the last minute angles and hype for the pay-per-view show, since pay-per-view is largely an impulse last minute buy. So this is still a conversation we have today where you look at some of the wrestling shows and there's been conversation on every podcast. I don't think I really heard about it with Double or Nothing because it wasn't really that long of a show, but there's always the conversation to the point where they move WrestleMania to 2 nights because of the same conversation. that these cards are so stacked, so long, they become these super mega events that are upwards of 6 to 7 hours before they split Mania up. And now at this point, 4 hours is nothing for wrestling fans. We sit there and watch 8 hours of wrestling. But it's always the conversation. How long can you keep the attention of the live audience and the fans at home? Can it be something that's sustained? And I think back then it's ironic because I think we have shorter attention spans now with, we didn't have the same technology and accessible information on our phone and other options as well. You got to remember that with Instagram, it's constant and instant and people are consuming the product in different ways. But it's definitely a conversation that fans and everyone differs on it. It's not going to be the same answer for everybody, but it's interesting to see 4 hours at that point is to them astronomically long, where it would just be a standard event. I mean, we get 2 hours of Dynamite, 3 hours of Raw, 2 hours of SmackDown. If you want 2 hours of NXT, not to mention 2 hours of Impact if you want. Then you got 2 hours of ROH. Oh, by the way, didn't get enough. New Japan Strong. Oh, you don't have enough? GCW. And then visit your local independent. So I think we've had a little bit more of an inundation of wrestling. But I think it's interesting to see. First of all, the utilization of Sunday Night Heat was immense to the pay-per-view buys. It was always that appetizer, the gateway drug to see your favorite stars, lead it in as a pre-show. And they still have that same concept on Peacock where they have the free streaming service has, the last minute pre-show, and it doesn't have the same appeal as Sunday Night Heat, not the same structure, but the same function. Thinking about that, it's just an interesting conversation that differs from fan to fan, but just shows you 25 years ago, same conversation. So we continue as well. We're speaking of Vince. He was featured on the cover story of this week's New York Magazine. So in the story, McMahon claims the TV character Steve Austin is actually playing the real life role of Vince McMahon. So we are continuing to talk about this story, and Vince always says that this was the attitude that he envisioned himself growing up, and that Austin was always the character that he channeled going into different walks of life and business. But it's tales old as time. We've heard a story a million times. As we mentioned before, McMahon and Taker, that 1026 magazine, were on the cover calling wrestling hottest sport in America in a story called Beyond Fake by Nancy Jo Scales. So Meltzer says, overall, the story is well written and about as accurate as one could expect from an outsider writing about the life of the most prominent player in the game in a business where history in general, and McMahon's personal history even more so, changes depending on which way the wind blows. And, then he tells the story about the cover itself is an interesting story. As I mentioned before, the magazine wanted a photo of Austin McMahon. McMahon refused. WWF offered Rocky Maivia, saying that he'd be a future star, and they said absolutely not. But Meltzer says perhaps McMahon was willing to go as far as to pose with any wrestler in the company except Austin, because while the other angles can be shown on the newsstands as phony, Austin versus Vince, the money angle has to be protected, although the photo pose with Austin suggested was to be an antagonistic photo. So they can go face to face. I mean, you can say the same thing about a poster. Like, how did you get them in the same room? Well, Photoshop. Otherwise, getting guys that are feuding can be on the poster. So even guys that hate each other can be there. The story continued talking about the hot period in the 80s, talking about the history of wrestling, and they also kind of touched upon the steroid stuff as well. An interesting story if you go and find it, but just shows wrestling's being discussed in circles where wrestling usually wasn't discussed, to the point where people are trying to understand the popularity. And through that, people are kind of uncovering things by turning over stones and finding some of the hairy stuff we don't like, the Brian Pillman stuff, the things that, as we said, the steroid trial, things with the FDA, just in general, how wrestling is influencing the younger generation in a bad way. So all that stuff is certainly par for the course during this era. It's people trying to, and you still hear it today, not as much, but when you hear about talking about, wrestling, it always has a negative spin on it by some of the media. It's definitely more accepted today than it ever was, but there's always that that veiled sort of tongue-in-cheek conversation about it's scripted, right? You know that, right? And then there was never more apparent than right here. And people couldn't understand why you'd want to watch something scripted when real athletic competition might be on a different channel. Or you can make the same argument today. And what I'll always say is, you know, the movies are fake, right? You love the movie Goodfellas. That's not real, by the way. Joe Pesci didn't play an actual gangster, but you enjoy that movie, right? So, you know, interesting enough in that story. And we're going to see more of that stuff as circles pick up news that didn't really exist before this. And this is sort of the byproduct of wrestling becoming so popular. Vince continued to talk about his hotel acquisition in this article, saying in Vegas they would have Stone Cold betting chips, an Undertaker tattoo parlor, a Sable lingerie shop, I should say. And McMahon talked about as a child sneaking out with the legendary Dr. Jerry Graham and bleaching his own hair blonde while a teenager to his father's chagrin. He talked other crazy stories as well about Bruno Sammartino, Billy Graham, Bob Backlund. So worth checking out if you guys are interested in some of the Vince stuff. I know that they have that podcast that just dropped recently, Beyond the Bastards. I think it's something like that, or Behind. I forget what it's called, but they covered Vince McMahon. So maybe some of those stories are in there as well. But obviously this is from Vince's perspective. This story in the magazine that's going to be sort of whitewashed with Vince's anecdotes to paint him in a positive light. So continuing here, in a note about Marty Bergman, the husband of McMahon's attorney, Laura Brevetti, who was accused in major stories in both the Village Voice and the New York Post of fixing the McMahon trial by posing as a producer from a current affair and offering money, but she refused. The reality was that Bergman was posing as a producer from 60 Minutes and claimed to Feinberg he could represent her in a potential TV movie deal. And while Feinberg didn't compromise her integrity by taking money from a TV show, which would hurt her credibility in court, Bergman, posing as her agent, did get enough knowledge as to what she did and didn't remember. He continued, by getting close to Feinberg, it later explained why Brevetti in the courtroom had an almost ESP-like knowledge of Feinberg's knowledge and memory and exploited those lapses, what was at the time appeared to be remarkable and genius-like precision. Not that any of this would have changed the eventual outcome of the trial. And again, Vince is the focal point. People are looking through everything, and some people that weren't paying attention probably missed the McMahon trial. So now things are getting unfolded and, you know, talking about the wrestling business at large. It's again, shining a light in a room that usually is dark. Continuing here, we have most accounts live of the first show held on 10/16 before a sellout crowd of 8,500. We have UFC in Sao Paulo, Brazil. And this is just talking about the popularity, and UFC is still in its infancy as far as popularity goes. But UFC, and I thought this was fascinating by, you know, talking about their comeback with a home base in Brazil. Meltzer says they're on the brink of extinction prior to this. So if their pay-per-views don't do well, they could be out. And Meltzer says UFC still won't appear to have enough exposure to be profitable based on pay-per-view alone. So it would appear to need rights fees being paid by foreign promoters, such as the reported 5-show deal negotiation with Globo Sport TV in Brazil, to continue on without wallowing in red ink, at least until a cable turnaround in the US. Man, 25 years, if you would have just invested in the money in UFC, talking about them, and I understand a lot of things went in their favor and a lot of smart business decisions were made and culture change as well as far as what's accepted. UFC is no longer looked at this black ball type of athletic competition. It's very much accepted now to the point where, you know, it's the same thing. It's the modern day boxing and more popular than that probably. But this pay-per-view did well to the point where they were able to stay afloat, tread water for a bit. And 25 years later, here we are. And now strange bedfellows, UFC and WWE now share a mothership as well. So how beautiful is that? You know, they talk about all the rules, the new rule books, and the next big move will be likely to attempt to get regulated in Nevada. And Meltzer says that's the most influential state as far as the athletic commissions go in the U.S. Regulation in Nevada may be more political in nature than anything else. And talks about how that's a huge piece. They eventually do get regulated in Nevada, which is huge for them. Vegas becomes their de facto home, especially in the later years. it took a bit to get regulated here. It was in our lifetimes, not too long ago, that I remember when they ran their first show at Barclays Center. Huge deal. We continue over here. The long-term plan is to eventually program Deborah McMichael with Sable, and that's probably 3 or 4 programs down the road. And we continue. Vader's final date will be 10/25 at MSG. In his release, there was a clause that wouldn't allow him to go back to World Championship Wrestling until December 99. Apparently Vader's opening up a Gold's Gym. And he's actually had a clause in his contract requiring him to stay below 350 pounds. And even though he made weight at the last weigh, and he apparently crash dieted to make it, talked about that last week. And Vince wanted him down to 320, and he told him to get a big push if he got that low. It never was in writing, and there was no push incoming. So we say goodbye to Vader and WWF. It's for the better. He goes off and gets, a little farewell in Japan. That's where he belongs. I think he'll be treated as such, as the monster he was. And unfortunately, the WWF run just never worked out. November 2nd, 1998 newsletter. And this is fresh off the heels of the Halloween Havoc match between Ultimate Warrior and Hulk Hogan, to show you the difference of things going on each side, building the future. We're about to crown The Rock as a champion in his mid-20s, while we have WCW rehashing a 1990 main event from WrestleMania 6 at the Sky Dome in Toronto. We have Ultimate Warrior and Hulk Hogan well past their prime. So we continue here. Meltzer says, in hyping the famous WWF match, WCW announcers tried to talk of it being legendary and among the greatest matches of all time. Obviously, the first meeting was something of a shocker at the time, and even placed fourth that year in balloting for Match of the Year. Meltzer says it was a weird match, and that when watching it live was great. It had excellent heat, a good storyline, no blatant missed moves, and was well choreographed in advance. Meltzer says, upon second viewing, the greatness of the match fell apart, which in contrast to nearly every great match in history. At that point, it comes across as a match with 70% of the time holding rest holds and with little of the way of anything special wrestling. He continues, years later, when WWF replayed the match on TV to hype one of Warrior's returns, people seeing it for the first time in years based on the standards that had changed remarked what a long, boring match with nothing happening that it was. So WCW decided, let's do the rematch. So Meltzer is very critical, as you can imagine, of this match. And only reason we're talking about this, of course, we're sitting here, WWF 1998, talking about the things that are relevant in wrestling. And I think we can't paint a clear picture about what's going on both sides if we don't understand to the extent of WCW and the mindset difference. Because that's the main thing here. It's a mindset difference of what the wrestling product should be. While WWF is taking risk and building new stars, WCW is doing the complete opposite and relying on the older history of wrestling. Meltzer says the show live at the MGM Grand Garden Arena sold out weeks in advance. And while some of the show was good and none was great, the Hogan Warrior rematch may very well have been among the worst high-profile wrestling matches of modern times. He says spots missed as bad as guys in their first pro match, but with two 40-plus former bodybuilders showing even less mobility and athletic ability than you would almost ever see in the ring, a baby face who clearly wasn't over, and a heel that they clearly didn't like either than you would almost ever see in the ring. All this climaxed by Hogan attempting to throw a fireball with a flash paper and nearly setting his hand on fire, and then elevating his nephew into the mainstream by clocking his once legendary foe out with a chair. Meltzer says the match was so bad that anyone saw it will never be able to remember their 1990 match without that reality breaking in and overwhelming the fantasy of what was. If you haven't watched the Halloween Havoc 1998 match, and I love Hogan Warrior from 1990 from a nostalgia standpoint, man, it's bad. It's as bad as you remember. But so that's just to build context. We won't go too deep into it, but that's just to build context of what was going on the other side. So we continue. As far as Survivor Series, we have people talking about who would win. And we talked about before, most people expect Rock to win, but there's an internal feeling that Steve Austin is so over that he doesn't need the belt to draw. And they point to the phenomenal house show business since Austin has lost the title as proof. Also, in MSG on 10/25 in the four-way, Austin pinned Rock and not Kane to win the match. But the way wrestling is today, remember this whenever you hear people talk about plans for pay-per-views more than 3 weeks ahead, this business changes totally every Tuesday when the new ratings come in. and long-term planning doesn't exist. So true. So absolutely true here. And we see that from time to time. They didn't know where they were going. They didn't know if they're turning left or right. And that's, booking on the fly and trying to react instead of being proactive. And it's a mindset difference about where you would like to go and where you think you should go. But they're driving down a road, dodging things. I look at the 1998 level of booking. It's like Subway Surfer. You're just like dodging things because the other side is hot on your tail. WCW is right there. And, of course, everyone's seeing Hogan and Warrior on the 1998 side just putting on an awful match. But Turner is a huge obstacle to overcome. And at any time, things could change. And if you make one misstep, you could be on the other side of it, not winning the ratings war. And that was the be all end all for them. But man, as far as long-term plans go, who would have thought we'd be in a world that we have a champion for 3 years, 1,000 days on, as of today, we're celebrating over 1,000 days. As you're watching this, maybe you're watching it, listen, or whatever the day after. Roman Reigns just surpassed 1,000 days. I think whatever, it's like 1,007 now, something like that, 1,006 based on Saturday. But it just shows you just how different the mindset has changed and the comfortability that WWE has in who they are. And then you're going to listen to us no matter what. We're going to do what we want and you're going to watch anyway. At the time, they didn't have that mindset. They were just trying desperately to appease everybody and keep them coming back. So whatever you think is right, whatever's wrong, I think the mindset of the Attitude Era booking would have been put the title on Sammy, Elimination Chamber. Who cares where we go next? It doesn't matter. It's the right decision right now. We'll deal with tomorrow as it comes. Now, the mindset they have today is what they did. And that's Roman Reigns is going to go over and Roman Reigns is going to stay champion. And guess what? He's going to beat Cody at WrestleMania. We're going to continue this run because the plan was always WrestleMania 40. And if that's the plan, there's no pivoting from that. Barring injury or something insane, they're staying on the path and full speed ahead. Vince McMahon in 1998 did not have that mindset. But we continue. We have several ideas on the board as to what to do with the bracketing should be announced on the 11-2 Raw. Meltzer says there are suggestions to have the first 2 rounds be a 10-minute time limit with both men eliminated in case of a draw. And then he says expect a few double eliminations. So we continue here with WWF debuting on Network 10 in Australia from 9:30 to 10:30 p.m. Saturday nights. Shows their initial interest in expanding internationally. Of course, we know the UK, Canada, but we know how big being international is for them. So we also continue. The part of the big bodyguard for Motley Crue on Raw was played by Andrew Martin, who should be on TV shortly. We know Andrew Martin is Test. He'll be with the corporation very soon. And very talented guy. Goes on to be an IC champion, unfortunately gone too soon. But yeah, Andrew Martin is on TV, and we heard about him in the Dory Funk training seminars. So we know that that's something that's very important to them. And they see him as look at his height and his flexibility and his agility and how he's able to move around the ring. One of the best elbow drops in the history of wrestling. He's going to be part of our TV here very, very soon. And we also continue about Motley Crue. Apparently, WWF tried to portray members of Motley Crue as big WWF fans in a radio interview. And then before their appearance, they were asked who their favorite member of DX was, and they had no idea who DX was in general. So, and continuing here, the last thing was talking about Kurt Angle and the Dory Funk current training camps. And Meltzer says, WWF put out a press release that Kurt Angle had signed. The Birmingham News said that for Angle to sign with WWF, he should be forced to undergo the same psychiatric evaluations that Mike Tyson did. So the athletic circle of people didn't see the appeal on Kurt Angle's side. But guess what? You guys are wrong. Kurt Angle made a career of it and is resting comfortably on all his money. And we continue with Dory Funk's current training camp. We have Steve Williams working his way back into shape after his injury. Steve Regal, Sean Stasiak, Giant Silva, Chris Daniels, Glenn Kolka, Ted Annis, who we know is Teddy Hart. He'll be released soon. Kurt Angle, Devin Storm, a.k.a. Crowbar, Andrew Martin, a.k.a. Test, and a few others. So some names in the Dory Funk stuff. And Mike and I talked extensively about potentially what was the better model? Is I guess what tree bared more fruit? And people can talk about the NXT developmental and top of the line training seminars and dieting and doctors and dietitians and all the like. But gotta say, Dory Funk's current training camps in 1998 was doing a good job of creating new talent. And can't argue with success. Look at some of those names that we've seen throughout the year. Start in the training camps, initially come in, Edge, Christian, guys that spent a little bit of time there, and then they are right on the main roster, winning championships in the hottest time in wrestling. So, we'll see exactly what continues with Dory Funk throughout the last 2 months and see if any other names pop up that are of interest. But that's the newsletter. I think it's time to get our fix. Talk about the October 19th, 1998 newsletter from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, the Bradley Center. Let's get into it.
Get your fix.
All right, we're at the Bradley Center, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and we're only miles away from Miller Park, where the Brewers play. Milwaukee is going to be, I think Wisconsin's going to hold the next 2 Raws, but our current champs are as followed. World champions vacant, 9/28/1998. Our IC champions, Ken Shamrock. He won it back on 10/12/98. The World Tag Champs, New Age Outlaws, won it back on 8/30/98. The European champion is X-Pac. He won it back October 18th. Light heavyweight champion is Christian. He also won it back at 10/18. And the women's champion is Jacqueline, 9/21/1998. And we lead into Raw with Jim Ross and Jerry Lawler welcome us in. And we have this, we always have these immediate segments that are just absolutely out of this world. And it's a ticker tape parade because Stone Cold Steve Austin's gone. So when Austin decided not to make the decision on who's going to become the new WWF champion at Judgment Day, which was the night before this Raw, McMahon followed through with his promise. He fired Steve Austin. And what's left of the WWF roster comes down to the ring as we have Patterson and Briscoe, Big Boss Man. We also have a K9 unit around a wheelchair McMahon because he also has an announcement. He gets on the mic. He says, as a result of the decision of a man no longer employed, he who shall not be named, he says, I guarantee on November 15th at Survivor Series, there will be an undisputed WWF champion, and there's going to be a 16-man tournament. The crowd is giving Vince all hell, chanting asshole in his direction, and they're making sure he hears it. And he continues and says, there'll be a champion. One of you guys will hold the title. And he says, last night, in case anyone doesn't really believe it happened, he said, Austin, screw you, you're fired. Vince tells somebody on the production team, they put a still of Austin's reaction. And in response to Austin's comment about starting hunting season early, Vince says he must have been hunting for a job. So the announcers all give, obviously JR is upset. Jerry Lawler's playing the heel role. And he says, if Austin wants to be a part of this show, he's going to have to buy a ticket like everybody else. And he continues and he's really laying it on thick here. And Steve Austin appears on the Titantron. He has a hunting rifle in hand. Jim Ross says, he's live outside the building. Vince seems a little bit nervous, but confident that he has the K9 unit. He has everything in place. We'll be all right. So this is definitely going to build throughout the show. But Steve Austin in full camo, he's not hunting for jobs. He's not hunting deer. He's hunting Vince McMahon, and we'll see that come to fruition very, very soon. So after the commercials, Vince is now in the back, and they're kind of escorting him through the hallways of the building. And they're, first thing, he wants Bossman to go get every one of his family members out of the building, and he wants a cameraman to stay in the office just in case Steve Austin comes in there and challenges him. So then the camera finds Steve Austin cleaning his rifle in the truck, and Jim Ross is trying to sell it like it's actually going to be Steve Austin coming in with a rifle. So this will unfold as we continue. So we open up with this match here. It's X-Pac versus Ken Shamrock, looking absolutely ripped. And this is a rematch from last week's IC title tournament final. And these two put on a decent match, 4 minutes and 17 seconds. X-Pac gets the win here, but only because Mankind gets involved. And Mankind comes out and hits him with the mandible claw. Shamrock breaks loose with a belly-to-belly suplex, turns around, boom, X Factor, 4 minutes and 16 seconds. X-Pac goes backstage. And also the other thing that was going on with Chyna during this match is she apparently got knocked out, and she also is being taken away because they think that she's involved in some other stuff. And we're going to find a little bit more about this throughout the show. Police have taken her away in handcuffs during the match. X-Pac's back there yelling at the policeman, trying to figure out what's going on with Chyna. And we also have the same police outside of Austin's truck as we pan to a different level of the show. And Austin's not bothering anybody. He shows him his 38 special. And they don't show the gun on TV because I think they learned their lesson with the Pillman stuff the year prior. And one of the plainclothes officers asks for an autograph, and he says it's for his kid. And one of the guy's sons is named Brett. He asks, please sign to Brett. Austin has a big smile on his face, and he asked the officer, how's Brett doing? So a little nod to, and again, we're going to see a little bit more of this. We'll talk about Survivor Series. They're going to pay homage to how Brett's run in WWF came to an end. But again, we'll talk about that next week. And after the break, Vince is with the K9 policeman. He says, you guys go arrest Steve Austin. Use the guns if you need to. The officer gets really upset, and he tells Vince, that's it, man. I'm not involved anymore. He leaves Vince alone in the room, takes the dog with him. Vince is freaking out. Like, what do you mean? Like, what did I say? I didn't mean to upset you. And now Vince is all alone because he has no protection. He's screaming, which leads us into our next match here. The Headbangers defeated LOD 2000. Of course, LOD 2000's Animal and Draws. Mosh and Thrasher on the Headbanger side. So the Headbangers come out to the ring, most notably wearing foam belts. They're doing some New Age Outlaw stuff, making fun of them. Match is 1 minute and 55 seconds. And, ending saw Thrasher grabbing Draws, rolls him up with a handful of tights. Match was absolutely horrendous. Not a great match. Headbangers are not great. There's some appeal to them in certain types of matchups, I guess, but with LOD 2000, man, there's just two clash styles with guys that have no business. And I'm sorry to say, like, having a match, there was no psychology, nothing to this. And it was the match. Content for the sake of content is what I'll say. Not a great thing, but they're advancing the story within LOD that they're breaking up. There's a lot to be desired as far as their camaraderie goes. They're still doing the Hawk stuff with the drinking and just bad. It's not good. So Pat Patterson's backstage. He's trying to soothe Mr. McMahon. He's giving him some coffee. This is just comical. Briscoe and Slaughter both leave with Patterson because, they're scared too. They make it quite clear that they don't want a piece of Austin, and they understand the ramifications of Vince's actions. So they all go, and now Vince is all alone. They all are looking for coffee and trying to make him feel better. And when we return, Vince is in the dressing room, and we get a knock on the door. He's definitely shaken up, but it's Mankind, and he has his new head of security, the newly debuted Sheriff Sacco. This is the third week in a row we've seen Sacco, fourth week in a row, I believe. Mankind brings some candy corn because he knows that Vinny has a sweet tooth, and Vince says he's happy to see him because everybody else has deserted me. Mankind is talking through Mr. Sacco. It's hilarious stuff, and they really found a good rhythm with Mankind. Like, this is the best version of Mankind in WWF, in my opinion. They really found a good niche here, and happy accident with the Sacco stuff. And he says he's hoping for a sleepover, and he's telling Vince, I really want to get to know you. Vince, of course, wants the protection of Foley, but obviously is resistant to even being around him. He's reluctant for any sort of conversation, but he's, I guess, happy he's there. So we go back to the ring, and out comes Taker. He has Paul Bearer with him, and we're trying to figure out why they're back together after Judgment Day. And Taker makes it clear. We buried the hatchet, and now Paul Bearer is going to lead what Taker calls his Ministry of Darkness. And he tells everybody, everyone's asking me why. And he says, simply because Paul Bearer is evil, and that's it. He says Paul Bearer has a vision, He truly understands the power of darkness, and he allowed me to clear my head, refocus of my purpose in the WWF. And he says, I'm going to form the Ministry of Darkness and will plague the WWF like no other. And you won't be understood by anyone that doesn't understand the darkness. So we continue. Paul Bearer gets on the mic. He talks about Kane being weak. And he also says he'll never understand the darkness. And that's why Paul Bearer is done with him. So we go to Taker again on the mic. And he says, I'm the one who started the fire that burned Kane all those years ago. And I set fire to Kane because you were weak. And there's no room for weak here. And only the strong survive. Taker's eyes roll back. And then Kane's music hits. And he comes down rolling a casket onto the stage. Kane straight up challenges Taker to a match. A casket match, if you could guess. And yeah. So we're going to get another match between Kane and Taker. Feud continues. Most notably for this segment, the Ministry of Darkness is born. And we're going to see the Ministry of Darkness happen and come together pretty quickly. You guys know the members. It's going to be guys like the Acolytes, Midian. Who else is in the Ministry of Darkness? Of course, Paul Bearer. Viscera is going to be part of this. I think Viscera debuts at the 99 Rumble. So there'll be people that are doing Taker's bidding. We're going to see the very satanic version of Taker be established very soon. I think the most satanic we're going to see him is WrestleMania 15 against Boss Man. But we'll see that soon. We won't be up to that era ourselves here, but you guys can continue watching, and that's where they take it. So at least they're doing something different with Taker's presentation, but they're staying kind of stuck in mud where they're still feuding. Kane and Taker are still feuding, believe it or not. They've been doing this all year. Over to Vince McMahon's office. Mankind and Vince, they have some snacks. They're talking, and Foley's trying to convince McMahon to rehire Austin to form a stable. And he wants it to be, you guessed it, McMahon, of course, Foley, Austin. And he's like the fourth and final member, Mr. Sacco. And Vincent says, I fired Austin on principle. And Foley pulls out a Twister board and asks Vince to play Twister. And when we come back, Vince is yelling at Mankind for playing Twister and kicks him out of the office. And he's like, I'm in danger right now and you want to play games? There's no time for games. Get out of my office. So begrudgingly, Foley leaves with the Twister game in tow. And we go into Warzone, where we have a match between Steve Blackman and Jeff Jarrett. Steve Blackman gets the win over here. Jeff Jarrett has Deborah McMichael in his corner. And this is a DQ finish. Before the match, they take us to the highlight of last week on Raw, where Blue Blazer attacks Steve Blackman. Jim Ross is saying that Blue Blazer is Owen Hart. And now this is the WWF debut of Deborah. So she gets not a huge reaction, if not a reaction at all. I don't think people actually recognize who she is. So she's here with Jeff Jarrett, and Bruce Pritchard on the same podcast I was talking about before, the Survivor Series 1998, was talking about how Deborah would call her every single day. And I think the relationship between the reason why he knew Deborah was because obviously WCW, but when Mongo had been a part of WrestleMania 11, the Battle Royal, or the men's football Battle Royal, and Deborah would call him weekly and say, hey, if you have anything for me, I'm interested in coming working TV. He would always say no without even asking anybody, because eventually it just became rhythmic that there was nothing for her. So fast forward to this, I think she had called. Bruce said no. Vince called him 10 minutes later and said, I want Deborah Michael to TV. He calls her back. Here we are with her with Jeff Jarrett. And I think the pairing worked. I really do. Curious to see what Belcaster thought about these two as a pair. I really think they both had a good pairing, but it's a DQ finish. We get the Blue Blazer running out, jumping Steve Blackman, belly-to-belly suplex. Jarrett joins Blazer, puts the boots to Blackman. The crowd is chanting Nugget because they're believing it's Owen. And Al Snow and Head appear. And, some chaos at the end of the match. Mid-card stuff going on here. And Jeff Jarrett and Owen Hart will be a tag team as of March of 99. They'll be tag champs, all that stuff. But like I said, mid-card fodder. We get Vince McMahon. Again, phone's ringing. McMahon finally answers the phone. Steve Austin is on the other line. And he says, time's up, you sorry bastard. I'm coming to get you. Vince McMahon buries his face in his hands. we now lead in, which you can tell is a commercial break, but obviously with the benefit of Peacock, no commercials. McMahon's checking with his limo driver to see if Steve Austin is anywhere around. He doesn't see Austin, and Vince asks him to leave the engine running and the back door open. Vince is going to be trying to make a run for it. As he gets in the car, Stone Cold opens the other side and grabs McMahon. Austin has his hunting bow, all of his paraphernalia with him, and he's getting ready and he's hunting Vince McMahon. So he wheels McMahon back into the Bradley Center, and he's making sure to bang his busted up ankle into different parts of the arena. And we go back to Vince's office, and the door's shut in front of the camera. Vince looks distraught. And this has been the common thread throughout the whole show. It's about Vince being hunted by Stone Cold, and we finally have our culmination here in the second hour of Raw at the 10 o'clock hour. Backstage, we rejoin Vince and Austin. Austin asks Vince why he's never hunted in his life. McMahon says, I went hunting once, but it was only a safari, and I took pictures. So Stone Cold then says, if you have a knife, do you think this could take out an elephant on the safari? McMahon is not able to answer. He looks like he's going to cry. And Austin's having a blast with this. As we lead into another match here, and of course, it's The Rock taking on D'Lo Brown. And one note of this match, and of course, The Rock gets the win, 3 minutes and 43 seconds with the Rock bottom. But if you've noticed, if you're watching this, The Rock has a new theme here. And of course, they have the Do You Smell What The Rock's Cooking and all the quotes, but it's like a techno theme. So go and check this out. Never appeared on any WWF The Music. They didn't put any of that stuff on there. Not even sure how long this theme lasts. But this is certainly not his best theme. Maybe his worst theme, actually. So we have, after the match, Mark Henry comes in. He double teams them, and there's a big splash from Henry. They're beating him down, and nobody comes out and saves The Rock. We got some WWF officials, refs coming in, and we got another big splash, and D'Lo gets in the cameraman's face and says, you better recognize Rock. So the nation is fully split. They do mention during this match that Godfather had an amiable split with the nation. He's just not a part of them anymore. So this is pretty much the official split, with the only two members of the nation left are D'Lo and Mark Henry. They'll do their thing for a bit. Even they'll go their separate ways. But at this point, nation's disintegrated. DX has won the war, I guess you could look at. But The Rock is fully immersed in this babyface lifestyle just for now. And they're really laying it thick, which makes it even, I guess, a little bit more shocking when everything happens in Survivor Series in 2 weeks from now. 2 weeks in TV time. So we go back to the backstage area. Austin's cleaning his knife, and he asks Vince, you want to find out how sharp it is? And Vince is saying no. And after the break, we go, McMahon is saying he hopes Austin's having fun because he isn't getting away with it. Austin said, I went hunting, but I didn't get a deer. I got a jackass. And he starts playing around with the crossbow, and we go into a Tiger Ali Singh segment. Babu is cooking hot dogs on a grill, and Tiger Ali Singh said, I'll pay $500 cash to any American who will swallow a kielbasa whole. So they do this whole thing, and Godfather comes out, and he tells Singh that he just got paid $500 for something he could not have had the whole night for a hell of a lot cheaper. And Singh decides those are fighting words. He throws Babu into Godfather. Tiger Ali Singh punches Godfather in a corner, and then Godfather fights back. And WWF officials jump in, and Godfather gets the better of it. Mini feud here between Tiger Ali Singh and the Godfather. Can't say anybody really cares. And when we come back from break, Austin is in the back again. He asks Vince if he's ever seen the movie Misery. And he points to the 2x4 between Vince's feet. And he duct taped Vince's mouth shut when he starts yelling for help. And he tapes him to the chair while he goes to look for the sledgehammer to see if he can really break his legs. And nobody's checking on Vince. That's it. Vince is by himself. Nobody cares what the chairman of the board is. He's just by himself. As we lead into another match, Mankind taking on Val Venus. And they replay what went down between Mankind and Shamrock earlier in the show. And we get some still shots from Val Venus and Goldust at Judgment Day. Back and forth. There's a lot of Val Venus signs in the crowd, most notably a Val Boski fan base where they all have the letters VALBOWSKI written on their chest, 9 to be exact. And match is short, 3 minutes and 35 seconds. And we get Mr. Sacco Mandible Claw. Terry Runnels is arguing. Here comes Ken Shamrock, and he hits Mankind in the knee with the chair. Val Venus takes advantage of the situation, covers Mankind for the 3 count, and then we get an outside brawl between Foley and Shamrock through the crowd, and then Mankind finds a chair. He hits Shamrock back and gives him a receipt. And as they clear out, here comes Goldust music. Val Venus and Terry are left all in the ring, and Goldust shows up and saying first blood, and he vows to shatter Val's dreams again. And again, he'll never forget the name of Goldust. And their feud's continuing, despite best efforts to forget about it. Goldust and Val Venus continue. Just as Taker and Kane continue, Val Venus and Goldust never ends. Backstage, Austin couldn't find the sledgehammer, but he's got big plans for McMahon that doesn't even involve physical pain. He's going to carry them out tonight. And Austin asks McMahon if he's ever seen You Bet Your Life. And Austin asks McMahon to pick a winner between Undertaker and Kane. McMahon doesn't want to play, but then he's like, finally, whatever, I pick Kane. Austin says if Kane wins, he'll do things the easy way. If there's any other outcome, they will do things the hard way. Which leads us into the casket match, which is the shortest casket match in the history of casket matches. Kane and Taker ended in no contest. And we have the two of these guys going. They actually wrestle, but again, it goes short because we get some shenanigans, and it's the Attitude Era. What would be 1998 without shenanigans? And Paul Bearer grabs a chair. Kane and Taker wind up breaking out of the casket when they're in there together. Taker comes off the apron. Kane catches him. He puts Taker into the apron, and Kane turns his attention to Bearer and stalks him up the aisle. Undertaker catches up to them, nails Kane in the back with the chair. Paul Bearer and Taker then walk through the curtain, and when Kane comes up, he follows with the chair. So no finish with the casket match. No ref was enforcing it, no matter what. So, zero emphasis on keeping true to the storylines and stipulations. They just don't give a shit about stipulations. And that's what's refreshing about AEW. Like, they abide by stipulations. Like, you're going to get something. They won't advertise a casket match unless you're going to get a finish. It's just par for the course here in the Attitude Era. It doesn't matter. Just absolute disregard for that. But we go back to Vince's office, and Austin tells McMahon if he loses the game. So he's taking Vince out to the ring. He's pushing him out of the office, and Vince is in the wheelchair, and he's distraught. And Lawler thinks he's heard a noise. Finally, we see Austin McMahon show up, go down the ramp, and Austin demands McMahon get in the ring and then grabs the mic. So Vince is on his knees pleading with Austin, please let me go. Don't do this, Austin. Vince hangs his head low, continues to cry, and Austin compares the much more confident McMahon on the Titantron to the sniveling and pathetic looking Vince we see in the ring. And of course, they go back and forth, and this is the famous segment here where he has the fake pop gun here, and he shoves a letter in Vince's pocket. Austin takes his bow and tells Vince, look at the picture of himself on the Titantron, look at his eyes because they're fixing to pop out of his head. Austin does pull out the gun. He sticks the microphone to the back of Vince's neck. Vince's overreacting is absolutely fantastic. He's over the top, as you can imagine. He pulls the trigger and the flag flies, and we, of course, get the famous picture of Bang 316. And Austin, obviously, with a toy gun. And he says, McMahon 316 must mean I just pissed my pants, and Vince's pants are soaked. And then as he's still recovering from the shock of everything that went down, Austin picks him up. Stone Cold Stunner. Austin must stun. And Austin helps Vince up to his backside and gives him one more stunner. And that was it. So my question for everybody is where did Patterson, Briscoe, and Slaughter go? They went out to get coffee, but they never came back. So we'll see what happens. Famous segment. They probably couldn't get away with it today, but they did it here. And what an end to Raw. And the McMahon-Austin feud goes to another level, and it just shows you man, people are just absolutely eating this stuff up.
You want raw? I'll get downright nasty.
So let's get into the next Raw here. It's the October 26th Raw. And we continue here where it's Madison, Wisconsin, the Kohl Center, and the current WWF champs are as followed. The WWF title is still vacant. The IC title is still Ken Shamrock, the World Tag Team Champions with the New Age Outlaws. And we also have the European Champion X-Pac, Light Heavyweight Champion still Christian, of course, Jacqueline on 9/21. So we continue, open up the show. Vince is still in his wheelchair as he comes out of the stage, surrounded by everybody, the big boss man. We get the suits. And against Vince's will, Steve Austin is in the building here tonight. He says, not only does Vince hold you responsible, Austin, but I hold every single WWF fan responsible as well. The crowd is cheering. And Vince says, I've lost all faith in humanity and what happened to people's value and morals after everything that went on last week. You guys are cheering against me. And they all were happy to see me urinate on myself. Vince wants to know where Briscoe, Patterson, and Slaughter were when this was happening to him. And obviously, he's very upset. And despite the injury, the insult after injury to what Vince will never forgive, it was a legal document jammed into his coat pocket, which was the battery of attorneys that are behind him, and said Vince will fight Austin in court all the way to the Supreme Court if necessary. Vince says before Austin makes his next move, you better take stock in what I say. And next thing we know, Austin goes on the Titantron. He tells Vince he ought to take stock in diapers after watching Vince piss himself last week. Vince has nothing left to say as the Stooges wheel him back to the locker room. And they also then take us back to the segment with Chyna, arrested over the charge of failure to appear when she didn't show up in court after the sexual harassment suit filed by Mark Henry. Of course, she was released from jail, but now is on a leave of absence to get her legal troubles resolved. And we do know through the newsletter and everything else that she's getting facial reconstructive surgery to look more feminine. So if you notice a change in her physical appearance, this is the time where it gets done. So we're going to see a little bit about that where, she was very open about it in interviews and all that. So certainly part of the conversation as we continue down the line. So we go into the next match here, or the opening match, I should say. X-Pac defended his European Championship against Steve Blackman. They give us a DQ finish. X-Pac got the win by DQ. And we get a lot of stuff going on, and we get, most notably, the debut and the return of Steve Regal. So Steve Regal really wants the European title. He comes out. He attacks X-Pac. Steve Blackman is the recipient of the DQ loss here. New Age Outlaws come up. They back up X-Pac. The referees and agents run down to get Regal off X-Pac. He is not letting go of him. And Steven Regal says, I'm the best European wrestler, so I want the European Championship. So, interesting segment here. And, of course, I love Steve Regal, William Regal. The gimmick was a little silly, of course, but just seeing the two of them link up, it's just great to have them on our screen. One of the best parts of 96 WCW that we covered. I love watching all of Regal's matches. So we're in Vince's meeting office, and he's getting upset, demanding his attorneys find a way to break the contract. And Michael Cole's found a door with Steve Austin's name on it. And he's trying to get word from Steve Austin about what's going on. Austin says, you'll have more information soon. Closes the door on Michael Cole's face, which leads us into The Rock building up more wins here, taking on Draws. And you can guess it, he got the win here. This time he hits the rock bottom and the people's elbow for the win. 4 minutes and 41 seconds. The crowd absolutely loses their mind with both of those moves, the rock bottom and the people's elbow. Draws at this point, he's raw athleticism. He's definitely green. He needs a little bit more seasoning, but you can definitely tell how much Rock is growing. And there's a lot to be said about just even an opponent like Draws in a short period of time. The Rock having the opportunity to showcase what he can do on a weekly basis is huge as far as momentum goes. And you can definitely tell his catchphrases are certainly building some momentum, but also the moveset, like the people's elbow is so ridiculously over. Same thing with the rock bottom. People are really resonating with that. And it's apparent how much it's essential to who he's going to be as far as popularity goes. The people's elbow, as silly as it is, I mean, just the setup, everything about it, the pomp and circumstance, everything about the people's elbow is perfect. So kudos whoever invented that. If it was The Rock or someone else told him to do it, it was fantastic. So we also got Michael Cole knocking on Steve Austin's dressing room again. He asked him about the legal document. And when he returns, Steve Austin tells Cole he's been advised not to say anything right now and will make a statement in front of the people. So Cole wonders, and so the announcers, who's in the room with Austin. And we lead in with New Age Outlaws and X-Pac heading out to the ring to introduce Motley Crue. DX runs around on stage during the performance. Motley Crue is performing the song Wild Side from the Girls, Girls, Girls album. Yeah, so this is just them here. And of course, Test is playing his bodyguard. And we get a little bit of chaos with him. And a fan jumps the guardrail and Test is there to grab him. So they show a little bit of Test roughing up a Plant fan to his introduction to the WWF audience. So Motley Crue is pretty popular in 98. I think they're a little bit well past the prime. I would say they're a little bit past, but still, it's a big deal for them to be here. There's enough of resignation as far as their popularity to be transcending on a WWF screen. So it's a big deal they're here. So we lead in with Kane and Gangrel. Kane gets the win over Gangrel, 3 minutes and 3 seconds. And they make sure to mention Kane will be part of the 16-man tournament Survivor Series. And this is a glorified squash match. So we get the flying clothesline, that awesome clothesline from Kane, choke slam, pins him right after it. So then we also get Christian getting involved. He comes off the top with the back elbow. Kane completely no-sells it, brushes him off. And Gangrel and Christian try to double team Kane. Kane's way too strong for that. Here comes Edge. He chop blocks Kane from behind. Edge is joining Gangrel and Christian to put Kane on his butt. And the Brood is attacking him. And Kane sits up after they leave. And they're trying to get out of dodge, but they're definitely provoking Kane a little bit here. The Brood working as a tandem. So in the back, Michael Cole is talking with Shane. Michael Cole reports that the McMahon family will have a statement regarding the situation with Steve Austin. And that leads us into the 10 o'clock hour with Stone Cold's music hitting, coming out to the ring. And he makes it clear. I don't know why Vince is so mad. Austin told the cops that the gun was a toy. No pain would be involved, that Vince wouldn't feel a thing. And after all those things are proven, Vince still pissed his pants like a baby. And he said, maybe next time I'll tell Vince something. He should believe it. And Austin whips out a new contract with the WWF. And he says, not only have I been reinstated, it guarantees me one shot at the WWF championship. That's all I need. And Austin seems to think he's got Vince right by his balls right now, because the only way he will leave the WWF is he quits the company himself. So Vince McMahon comes out on the stage and Bossman's by his side. Of course, Patterson, Briscoe, and Slaughter are there as well. Vince says, nothing would please me more than hearing you say I quit. And he says, since Austin is once again employed, there's not a whole lot I can do. And then Vince forces Austin into an I quit match with Ken Shamrock. So Vince wonders how Austin is going to be able to get past this and kind of stacking the deck. And next thing we know, the camera gets bumped when we see Vince's son Shane heading to the ring. No pomp and circumstance. We can recognize Shane. He's doing commentary on Sunday Night Heat. He's been on our screen. Vince asks Shane to come stand with him. Shane just ignores him, and Vince is getting pissed. Shane tells his father he won't listen anymore. Cuts a very passionate promo. And he says, I'm reinstating Steve Austin back into the WWF. He claims that obviously Vince has an ego problem, and then which is why all the wrestlers come and go. And a very passionate promo from Shane's side, and who knows how much of it is based in truth. And Vince is very upset. Great acting job by Vince over here. His eyes well up with tears. Patterson's trying to hug him. And Austin to get... to rub it in a little bit, of course. He gets on the mic and he says, if you think Vince got what he was coming, give me a hell yeah. Austin's music plays, and that was it. And when we return, Steve Austin stopping Shane as he's leaving the building, tosses him a beer, and just out of mutual respect. Of course, we know what will happen with Shane. This is part of the long con on Vince's side, but at the moment, it seems like Vince has won. The fans are happy, and Vince is just distraught, sitting in his wheelchair with his ankle all tuned up, and yeah, he's in bad shape. So we lead into a match here. Godfather taking on Tiger Ali Singh. Babu in his corner. This was a match that was built last week with the violent exchange between the two of them. And match is a double DQ. Match is bad. 4 minutes and 32 seconds. And we get some stuff going on. The crowd is doing the wave during this match. And Singh and Godfather essentially just not listening to the ref, abiding by the count. And, you know, as he was trying to break after a 5 submission, both these dudes get a double DQ. Hard-hitting match, of course. The Godfather, anytime that he's in there doing stuff, he's able to, you know, doing his spots. It's going to be hard-hitting, but Tiger Ali Singh, not great at all. Michael Cole's in the back with Vince McMahon, and Vince is clearly just very upset, which leads us into a multi-man match. Kai and Tai taking on the Oddities. So on Kai and Tai's side, you have Dick Togo, Men's Teo, Sho Funaki, and Taka Michinoku with Yamaguchi-san taking on the Oddities, Golga, Kurgan, Shaggy 2 Dope, and Violent J. We have Giant Silva and Princess Luna in their corner. 8-man tag format. 3 minutes and 45 seconds. It's a DQ finish. Shaggy kicks Funaki in the balls when Violent J tosses away the ref. The Oddities argue after the match. They're arguing with the ICP guys. And Luna chases ICP away, and this might be the last we see of him. I don't understand what was the point of a DQ finish here. Apparently, this is the one and only WWF match involving the ICP. They are at ringside from some other matches. They get attacked, as we saw last week, by the Headbangers. But this is the first official and only match on their cage match. If you go and check it out, not great. You can skip over it. So they take us back to the top of the hour, where outside the arena, well, they're replaying the Shane promo, and then McMahon's being wheeled over to his limo. And then the Slaughter, Briscoe, and Patterson are all promising Steve Austin will quit tonight in the match with Ken Shamrock. And then we lead into a Michael Cole segment with Ken Shamrock, and he says, this isn't about the IC title tonight. It's about who's the most dangerous man. And we're going to get Austin versus Shamrock in the main event, which leads us into another match, another goddamn DQ finish. Goldust and Mark Marrow. So Mark Marrow has Jacqueline in his corner. He defeated Goldust by DQ, 2 minutes and 55 seconds. The Shattered Dreams got Goldust DQ'd because the move is kicking him right between the legs. And Mark Marrow gets the win, but he's worse for wear after taking that move. And Goldust got a little fun in too. To upset Mark Marrow, he kissed Jackie with a sloppy kiss, and yeah, a mess of a match. Another DQ for the point of DQ. Like, what? Why can't any of these guys lose? I don't get that. That's the one thing I can't wrap my head around. Where when you do so many DQs, they mean nothing. Really, truly, they mean nothing. Why can't one of these guys just lose? Someone can't be pinned for 3 matches. You can't have for that oddity match with Kai and Tai. Kai and Tai couldn't have just got the win. Why couldn't they just pin somebody? You're telling me that Shaggy 2 Dope, Violent J, Kurgan, or Golga couldn't get pinned? Same thing with Tiger Ali Singh. You're telling me Tiger Ali Singh couldn't get pinned by Godfather? You can make the same argument here. Mark Marrow can't pin Goldust, or Goldust can't pin Mark Marrow. Who cares? Just have a finish. We're having 3 straight DQ finishes. Bad. So Mark Marrow's down on the mat. Jacqueline standing over him. Sable's music hits. She challenged Jackie to a match for the WWF Women's title at Survivor Series. And Jacqueline she accepts it. So we're going to get this match for the title. Nice feud that seems to be the only potential feud between 2 prominent women. Of course, there's other women in the roster, but it seems like it's a Jackie Sable show. So we see the first pairing of Mankind and Al Snow together. And of course, it's a natural pairing. One guy is Mr. Sacco. The other has a mannequin head, which leads us in for the tag team championship. New Age Outlaws, Billy Gunn and Road Dogg defending against Al Snow and Mankind. We know Mankind's been added to the WWF tournament at Survivor Series. Back and forth match. Gotta say, pretty good match. 5 minutes and 28 seconds. And Road Dogg rolls Snow up for the 3 count, so it's a quick win. And D'Lo Brown and Mark Henry show up after the match. They beat up the New Age Outlaws because they're number 1 contenders. And they want a title shot at Survivor Series. Al Snow and Mankind playing up to the crowd about Sacco and Head, the mannequin head. And they go back and forth. And Again, this match was pretty fun. It felt longer than 5 minutes and 28 seconds. We saw some of the stuff that we would see from any of these matches. Of course, the shaky knee drop from Road Dogg and double arm DDT from Mick Foley and the snowplow, underrated finish. And we got some ref that's not able to make the count. And there's a lot of gimmicks in this match. And, Mankind and Al Snow have a little bit of extension because of the fact that they never teamed before. And, they're trying to figure out who's going to use their gimmick to win the match. Is it going to be the Mannequin Head? Is it going to be Mr. Sacco? And eventually that's their demise. But of course, we'll see more of that throughout this Attitude Era. They're big parts of it. And of course, we have our main event, Steve Austin against Ken Shamrock. And Ken Shamrock has Gerald Briscoe, Pat Patterson, and Sergeant Slaughter in his corner. This, of course, is an I Quit match. So Vince, he's conspicuous by his absence. And Vince McMahon's posse came out, Briscoe, Patterson, and Slaughter, as I mentioned. The announcers do mention that Ken Shamrock is going to be one of the 16 men to enter the WWF tournament at Survivor Series. And Shamrock is absolutely off to the races. He takes on Austin before he can even take his vest off. Hard-hitting match between the both of them, back and forth. And the best part of the match was, Austin trying to get past the submissions. He fights back, hits the Luthez press. JR's losing his mind on commentary. Gerald Briscoe grabs Austin's ankle just so he has momentum, and Patterson knocks out the ref. So ref bump. That everyone else is getting involved, but before that even happens, Mankind appears. He grabs and puts Shamrock in the mandible claw. Austin then grabs the chair, whacks Shamrock in the head, which is the only way he can do it, right in the head. And not knowing what Austin will do next, Mankind ducks underneath. He has Mr. Sacco in his hand, and next thing we know, here comes Tim White. Austin has Shamrock in a weak chin lock, so he's holding him over, and he grabs Shamrock's hand and makes it appear like he's tapping out. And then he gets up, Stone Cold Stunners for all the Stooges. Briscoe gets one, Patterson gets one, Slaughter gets one, and they do the fake tap out, which makes no sense, but whatever. It's goofy. The I Quit match, it is what it is. But Steve Austin one-ups the corporation yet again, and he is standing tall to end, and he's fully back. The announcers are going nuts, and the fans are going crazy, and that's what it's all about here. So that's how Raw goes off the air. As we lead into the November 2nd Raw from the Houston, Texas, the Compaq Center, all our champions are the same. We are now left with the question, will the McMahon family fall to the wayside? And Shane McMahon comes out to the ring to start the show. He's happy. He grabs the mic. And before he does, Jim Ross and Lawler are discussing McMahon not being here tonight. And they make it clear that Shane's in charge. He's the acting chairman in his father's stead. So Stone Cold will get his WWF title shot the night after Survivor Series on November 16th. And without further ado, Shane brings out Austin with the glass breaking. Austin hits all four corners, and we cut backstage to see a limo appearing. Here comes Gerald Briscoe, Pat Patterson, Slaughter. They're joined by Big Boss Man, and they cut away and help Vince get into his wheelchair that was brought for him. So now Vince and Austin are on a split screen, and next thing we hear, Vince's big booming voice. And as Patterson, Briscoe, and Slaughter and Boss Man appear on the ramp, Vince looks confident for whatever reason, despite everything going down. He's not upset anymore. And any decision for Vince to retire was just wishful thinking. What he said? Vince quiets down the crowd to chant asshole. And everybody he goes, everybody would be happy if I was to retire, maybe even die. The fans pop at that. And he says, so much for passing the torch. No family, no friends, no WWF superstars should come to my funeral. And when I die, I want to go straight to hell. And which is where he's been lately, thanks to his son Shane, of course, Stone Cold. Vince points to the ring, and he relieves Shane of his corporate responsibilities and says, you're going to be a lowly ref. If you suck at that, if you're not able to do that, then you go back on the ring crew. So Shane paying for his sins a little bit here. And as for Austin, Vince says, I wish there was something I could do about the contract, but I can't. And then he changes Austin's plans by saying, your shot for the WWE title won't come in the night after Survivor Series. Instead, you'll get your shot at Survivor Series because now you'll be part of the tournament. So in the first round, he'll be facing Bossman. He says, good luck. Bossman rips off his shades and stares down Austin. Big Bossman looks absolutely badass in this era. What a good repackage on his end. And Vince says, I have one thing left to say to you guys. And for the record, I'm not the one that's an asshole. It's you guys. And then Vince thanks the audience and makes his exit. And they show us what happened during the break. Vince was wheeled down to the announce table to tell JR and Lawler they better get everything straight because they need to remember who signs their checks. You guys can't be talking shit about me. He points up to the blue steel cage that's hanging above, and someone's going to serve hard time. So they're alluding to Bossman's going to get in the cage with somebody. We're not sure who. Cage hanging over the ring. It's like a black cloud over everybody. Who's going to be in there and what's going to happen? Our opening match here was the Brood taking on DX. So DX, a combination of Billy Gunn, Road Dogg, and X-Pac against Christian, Edge, and Gangrel. A lot of good names here. Of course, on the Brood side, Christian and Edge. And DX, of course, they've been planting the seeds for dissension. And it looks like they're getting along. And they've been having a lot of these breakup vibes for a little bit. And this is the Raw debut of the Brood as a crew. This is the first time we're seeing them in action together. And they appeared on the Heat prior to this. But this is the first time on Raw that they'll be part of action. And really good action back and forth. 4 minutes and 30 seconds. We get, unfortunately, a no contest in the 6-man tag because Kane comes out, gets in the ring, and nobody's very concerned except for Billy Gunn. He runs after Kane. He gets beat up. Gangrel then takes Gunn with the clothesline over the barricade. X-Pac delivers a Bronco Buster to Christian, and then Kane walks in, chokeslams Edge. X-Pac turns around into a chokeslam as well. Christian gets up. He walks into a chokeslam, and Kane does the whole corner thing. Lights on fire. The arena goes red. And building Kane up to be stronger, especially after last week when the Brood left him laying for a second. I just wish we would have got a finish here. Good action, 4 minutes and 30 seconds. Good opener, especially following that segment. But par for the course here in the Attitude Era. We just don't get finishes. And I don't understand why. So during the commercial break, Michael Cole was trying to catch up with Vince to see how he was doing. And the Big Boss Man is in the back. And Boss Man is just intimidating. He grabs Michael Cole by the throat. And they're really setting Boss Man up to be this big bad. And I wonder if they've ever had plans for him to be champion. I know I heard a story that at Survivor Series, he was supposed to be part of that finish between, that with Austin when he gets eliminated, and he wasn't there for that spot. And I think it just completely burned any sort of bridge that they had for his push because he was unreliable. He was supposed to be at ringside, but he was getting ready for his match with Taker. We'll talk about that next week. I'm going to look into the newsletter and find some stuff from the future and talk about. But it's certainly a story that leaves a lot to be desired on their end because you mess up a finish, and especially a finish involving Stone Cold in this tournament could have been detrimental, and you have to pivot on the fly and figure something else out. Not good. Next match here was a Droz versus Road Warrior Hawk match, and match never happens. Hawk gets to the ring presenting himself as drunk, and Droz beats up Hawk. Animal walks out to be the voice of reason. LOD are trying to break up the fight together. Animal trying to break it up, I should say. Match doesn't start. Animal ends up walking off with Droz, and then Hawk is left in the ring and figuring out what else is going to happen here with LOD. And then we show Vince in the hallway. He's getting ready to go out the door. Jim Cornette tries to go through the door at the same time. Boston's right there to choke Cornette up against the wall. Vince then yells at Cornette to quit wearing outlandish jackets and get with the program on commentary. And Vince says he can't stop with the 1980s wrestling crap. You can get the hell out of the WWF. So very interesting stuff here. We continue as well. Michael Cole, who has recovered from his assault, is ready to interview Mankind and Al Snow. Michael Cole points out that you guys teamed last week against New Age Outlaws. You didn't get along. And he wants to know why this week will be different. Snow and Mankind don't really give an answer. They pretty much just continue arguing amongst themselves. And we see them team up with each other to take on the Oddities, the team of Golga and Kurgan. So, of course, the stuffed Cartman is at ringside. Giant Silva, Princess Luna. And Mankind's wearing a happy face tie. I've noted that here. Mankind and Al Snow are trying to break down the big Kurgan from the start. And again, we see some distension between the two of them. Mankind can't find Mr. Sacco. He pulls off a shoe, uses the sock he's wearing. Al Snow doesn't understand what's going on, and Mankind leaves the ring. And Al Snow's there by himself trying to figure it out. He takes a sidewalk slam from Kurgan. Golga misses a running leg drop, and Al Snow tries to fight both of them off. But Kurgan grabs him from a choke slam, leaving Al Snow down for the Golga splash. And the Oddities get the win. Interesting, man. Would not have expected that. Golga and Kurgan getting the win. What was the last time you saw that? So, pretty entertaining match. Some goofy stuff with Al Snow and Mankind, but, you know, entertaining match. At least we got to finish. 4 minutes and 4 minutes and 36 seconds. We also see Vince McMahon backstage at Big Boss and wheel up to a group of people watching the monitor. And one of the guys sitting around the monitor is Shaquille O'Neal. And the NBA was going through a lockout period during this time, so there were no games. Vince confronts him and asks him whether or not he's got a backstage pass. Shaquille O'Neal stands up wearing a WWF shirt and tells Vince, I don't need a backstage pass. Vince then says, if you don't have a backstage pass, you need to get out. And Shaq sits back down, mouths asshole to himself, and he's right back there with, I think, if you look at the picture, Scott Taylor, Bob Holly. And legend has it that apparently Shaq just happened to be there and he was asked if he wanted to do something on camera, and that was it. So I'm surprised they didn't do anything bigger than what they wind up doing on this Raw. We have a Goldust and Steven Regal match. Ends in a no contest. And he sends out an open challenge to see if there's any real men in the WWF. Here comes Goldust. And as talented as Regal is, I mean, at this point, like, watch this match. He really was in no condition to be in here and not making any assumptions about what was going on. But I'm just saying, go out and watch this match. It definitely wasn't the Steven Regal, William Regal we know and love. So we get a no contest because Kane gets involved. He delivers a choke slam to Regal and Goldust. Out comes Marlena. She goes to check on Goldust, and Kane eyes Marlena, grabs her by the throat, and a bunch of officials head down to the ring to stop him. Kane decides to let her go, and we get Tony Garea takes a choke slam instead, and he does that awesome shaky cell job that Terry Funk did in the Hell in a Cell. Shaky, kind of like the Devon Dudley shaking, like you're in so much pain. And then Kane does his taunt, setting the corners on fire. So backstage, we're with Vince again. He's talking to Mankind. McMahon says, if Mankind will not interfere in the IC title match, I'll give you a gift. Mankind accepts. Vince hands him literally the broken in half WWF Championship that's held together with duct tape and refers to it as the Hardcore Championship. So the word hardcore is written on duct tape with a Sharpie. Mankind is obsessed with it. He's so happy. And Vince says, I might have lost my son tonight, but I think I've gained another one. And Mankind goes all leave it to Beaver on him and says, gee, thanks, Dad. So Vince stops on his way out, but doesn't say anything. Man, this is the WWF Hardcore title. This is a big piece here of the Attitude Era that just was made on a whim. You know, there's legend about what this belt was being destroyed, but it's the Hardcore Championship, and it's awarded to Mick Foley here on a one-off, and it has a great lineage as far as the Attitude Era. Eventually it loses its steam, but this was a great part that gets defended pretty extensively throughout the Attitude Era. A lot of good matches around that Hardcore Championship. WrestleMania isn't all included. We go into Raw Zone, and it's an Intercontinental Championship match. The Rock taking on Ken Shamrock, and match ends by DQ. And we, of course, know throughout 1998, Rock and Ken Shamrock have a very big history. Of course, Rock and Ken Shamrock wrestled at WrestleMania 14. But all throughout, I mean, this was an essential feud that was very impressionable about who The Rock became. Working with Ken Shamrock was essential into who he became throughout this year. And I think these guys, and we don't talk about Ken Shamrock and The Rock as far as modern rivals go. And you think about The Rock, you probably think of Stone Cold, think of Triple H. But this was a huge piece to who The Rock became. So much so that when Ken Shamrock went into the Impact Hall of Fame, The Rock was the one who inducted him because of their connection. They have such a huge piece together. And after Rock's entrance, Vince comes out, wheeled out by the Stooges. And, you know, Vince has a problem with the People's Champion. He says if The Rock doesn't win the IC title, The Rock doesn't go to Survivor Series. So the crowd is very disappointed. And he says he won't be the number one contender for the WWF title anymore, and this is a must-win for The Rock. They go back and forth with a really good match. So Shamrock staggers up at one point, turns around to a slam, set up the people's elbow. Rock covers, no ref. Shamrock grabs the chair again while The Rock is trying to wake up Tim White, saying, get up. And the ref sees the chair shot, DQs Shamrock to end the match. 8 minutes straight. Very good match. Shamrock getting good heat. Rock getting a lot of pop. Very, like I said, very good match. Don't like the finish, but I understand it in this regard because can't have either guy looking weak going into what would eventually be the tournament. But, you know, I think it's a good use of the DQ, and it probably would have had more meaning if you didn't go and do the DQ finish and spam it 40 different times. So looks like The Rock is going to be free the night of the Survivor Series since he didn't win the IC title. Vince calls The Rock the people's chump. Vince gets wheeled to the locker room. Very good match with a lot of heat. So when we return, they take us back to moments ago when Vince was screwing The Rock out of going to Survivor Series. And we go to the back where The Rock is pissed off, kicking chairs, flipping furniture. He's looking for Vince. And we go into the next match. Val Venus defeating Jeff Jarrett with Deborah McMichael by, you guessed it, another DQ. So the Blue Blazer is the one that causes it. He shoves Val Venus to the mat. And Owen Hart, Jeff Jarrett gives Val Venus the stroke and leaves with Deborah. Back and forth match. I mean, there's some stuff on commentary building this up, this mid-card feud. But it's just mid-card fodder, and they can't help themselves. They have to do a DQ. When we come back, Vince is with the Stooges. He tells them that The Rock has threatened his life and destroying property, so Vince would like to have The Rock arrested. We'll see this follow up in a second. And we have a number one contendership match for the WWF Tag Team Championship. D'Lo Brown and Mark Henry versus the Headbangers. Of course, they can't give us a finish. It ends in no contest. The winners face the New Age Outlaws for the WWF Tag Titles Survivor Series. The Headbangers are mocking the Outlaws. And Mosh is dressed up as dumbass Rockabilly. And Thrasher is dressed up as Puppy Dog Jerky James. And this match is back and forth. Of course, Kane gets involved at the end. And the crowd is upset about the ending. Kane delivers a double choke slam to D'Lo and Mosh. And Paul Bearer, backing Taker's corner, has really made Kane very upset. And there's nobody left to control Kane. So we don't know who's going to face the Outlaws at Survivor Series. So we have to figure that out. Both teams seem to have a liable cause and, I guess, claim to do it. So in the arena, we have Rock getting handcuffed and he's putting into a car. And then we have Owen Hart coming down to the ring. Jim Ross brings up the fact that Owen Hart put Dan Severn on the shelf 5 weeks ago on Raw. And at Dan Severn's request, Owen came to announce he's no longer an active wrestler and has retired. He left his home in Calgary to hear what Severn has to say. Now comes Severn wearing a cervical collar. Severn says, I'm not here for you to apologize, but I want you to know you're not fooling anyone with the Blue Blazer stuff, and I just want you to know that you're scum. So Owen shoves him down, clotheslines him. He's wearing the neck brace, so it's very jarring. Steve Blackman runs down, chases Owen away. And when we return from commercial, Steve Blackman watches over an ambulance. Dan Severn's being taken away. And backstage, Blackman is looking at Owen and jumps him. Next thing we know, Blue Blazer attacks Blackman from behind. He grabs Blackman and applies a Dragon Sleeper, and Owen breaks away from the referees and stomps the crap out of Blackman. And now we're like, okay, now we see Owen and Blue Blazer at the same time. Who is the Blue Blazer? We get the cage lowering down to the ring. And when we come back, Vince gets wheeled down to the ring and taken to ringside by Patterson, Briscoe, and Sergeant Slaughter. And Bossman, of course, is there. And after Bossman and Vince's Stooges make sure the cage is secure and the door's locked, Vince says Bossman abused the Stooges for allowing Vince to be kidnapped and embarrassed by Stone Cold. The Stooges are fighting back. It was 3-on-1. And all Vince wants is their 100% allegiance, and this will all end. So this builds until Vince orders Bossman to strip them of their clothing. And even JR is having some pity on them. He's upset about it going on. When Austin hears clothing removed, he comes down to save us all. He gets over the cage, stomps the shit out of Bossman. And he said, obviously clear that he's not here to save the Stooges. He's beating the crap out of Bossman. And show that Patterson is in McMahon's corner. He grabs Bossman's nightstick. He whacks Austin in the hip. Austin no-sells it. Then he goes right after Patterson. Bossman grabs the nightstick himself. And then we see Shane McMahon show up to get Bossman's attention. It looks like Bossman's ready to hit Shane, but Vince calls off Bossman and has him get out of the ring. Thought this was really well done. I thought it made Bossman continue to look strong without having to get beat up by Austin like it would usually end on a normal Raw. And Vince obviously is putting emphasis on the fact that obviously Shane's his son, despite him not being on his side. Shane gives him the middle finger, but there's still some humanity in Vince, despite him being pretty much the definition of evil during this time. And also places importance on the Bossman Austin match because we didn't see who can get the best of each other. And there's still a sliver of a doubt to see Bossman can possibly beat Austin and put him up, and take him out. Because I think at this point, Bossman's not relegated to mid-card hell. He's still sort of viewed as a main guy before this. So we get Taker's music hitting, and he's joined by Paul Bearer, and he meets Austin inside the cage. They are brawling back and forth. The arena goes dark, and Kane's music hits. And once he reaches a step, Kane sets the cage on fire. He gets inside the cage. He joins Taker and Austin. They go off brawling each other. Absolutely insane ending to Raw. Cool visual. Very good build towards what would be a crescendo of Survivor Series 98. We're looking forward to a very good, because we have, I think, 2 more Raws, but they're building up towards this big pay-per-view and everything is coming together where we're getting more stories. And of course, everyone thinks they know what's going to happen. But that's the beautiful part about all of it. We just don't know because they, just as they zig, we zag, and they go in the different direction and figure out, the reactionary type of book. And as we discussed earlier in this show, there's a lot to be said about they decide to figure out what is the best reaction based on TV ratings. In a lot of ways, it forces them to react accordingly instead of staying on the path. And, you make the argument for what's better, but I think it's creating some of this dynamic television that is must see. You're seeing all these endings have such a huge impact on how we watch wrestling. And this is the bar right here, how you set the stage for these big pay-per-views. And that's why people were disappointed in that Double or Nothing go-home show. They wanted something like this. And I think we've been conditioned to think that's how you do a go-home show. Obviously, there's other ways to do it to build towards the pay-per-view, but as fans of this era, that's what gets you excited to see all the chaos that the Attitude Era and even Nitro was doing on their side. But let's get to the chaser. I'm going to pick our favorite part of the 3 Raws here, the 6 hours of content, and decide what was my favorite.
The chaser.
All right, going with my favorite match of the 3 nights, I have to go Rock versus Ken Shamrock for the Intercontinental Championship. Match went 8 minutes. It was not pay-per-view quality, but there was a lot of good stuff in here, hard-hitting action. I love the chemistry between Rock and Ken Shamrock. I think they have great cohesion in the ring. Even though it was a DQ finish, I thought it was the right choice. There's a lot of good action throughout the night. A lot of it was tied together with, obviously, the first show had Vince McMahon with the Bang 316. Of course, we also had a lot of the stuff with Kane happening throughout the other shows. And then not to mention, we had this cage segment as well to end Raw and the birth of the Hardcore Championship. So as we mentioned, week after week, there's something more and more important that we continue to look upon with, favored eyes, because I think at this point we're looking at the Attitude Era through a lens of it's crazy how each week they find a way to top themselves. And I think that's something to be said about basing it on ratings and having to compete on the other side. And there was a lot of pressure to put out the best possible content by giving people what they wanted and sometimes giving pay-per-view quality matches that were advertised, maybe not delivering in the ring, but on, advertising them. We got a casket match here. In the past, we have Hell in a Cell matches. We have cage matches. We have different types of matches that they just put on Raw. And do they deliver? A lot of times they don't. Like, a casket match has no right being 4 minutes and 41 seconds with no finish. But some of that stuff is just what draws people in. Seeing that they're going to be doing that gets people to hook, line, and sinker. You open up a show saying there's going to be a casket match, and whether it delivers or not, you get them to stick for the next week. And these opening segments with the McMahons and Shane and Briscoe and Patterson and Stone Cold all of it's so weaved together that it builds up tension throughout the show, and it's weaved through everything they do. This Vince and Stone Cold stuff is infused in every single thing they do. So if you want that full story, you kind of have to sit through the Mark Merrows and the Goldust and the Tiger Alley Sings and the Godfather matches, because if you don't, you miss pivotal points of the TV show that, they're not just putting Stone Cold on one segment. If you tune into SmackDown, they kind of do the same thing with the Bloodline now, where they'll input some segments throughout the show to lead up to the big segment, but nothing is ever as infused. They know exactly what is working in this era. They continue to show us that they're going to hit that button until it doesn't work anymore. And I don't think it ever stops working. That's the craziest part, is that they continue to up the ante with what's going on, whether it be concrete in his car or attacking him in a medical facility or taking him out with a Zamboni. Of course, 99, we're going to get the beer truck spraying down the whole corporation. There's so much that goes on, and they continue to just do new things and break new ground and see what ridiculousness they can get away with, because that's really what it is. It's just stuff turned up to 11 and seeing how crazy and over the top they can get, because that's what was selling. And it's just absolutely wild.
You want raw? I'll get downright nasty.
That's right, Vince Russo. We are going to get downright nasty. So we're going to preview the upcoming week. Close the tab. Lights are coming on the bar. I appreciate you guys hanging with me for 2 hours here. We miss Mike Belcaster. He'll be back from his Vegas trip. But we were joined so nicely by Sammy Guevara and the Double or Nothing set and Mike Belcaster, and talking about these 3 Raws, the 6 hours of content. Hope you guys had a good time talking about it. But let's get to closing the tab and preview next week and see what's coming up here on the Tavern.
Closing the tab.
All right, for the final wrap-up, next week's show will be, believe it or not, episode 19 of Season 3, airing on June 9th, 2023, next Friday. And we have a nice pay-per-view sandwich. We have the November 9th Raw, Survivor Series Deadly Games 1998, and of course, to figure it out, it's November 16th Raw. As we build towards the end of the year, we're quickly approaching the end of this year, getting ready for Season 4 of Shot of Nostalgia, that mini-season. As you guys heard on Wrestling Tonight, we announced that Colton will be a part of Shot of Nostalgia Smoky Mountain Wrestling. So you're going to get either the combination, ideally, of the 3 of us, myself, Mike Belcaster, and Colton at Mullet.mania. You may be able to get myself and Colton. Maybe there'll be a time you have Colton and Mike by themselves as well. So we're going to have a 3-man team. And I think Belcaster, Chad was talking about it. It's so interesting because it provides the different mindsets of the best wrestling minds and territories. You got New York, you got Chicago, and of course you got Kentucky from the Southern wrestling. So all different mindsets, and we're all going to be enjoying the product, each other, and we're going to be discussing it at length. 7 episodes, 2 months for every episode, aside from the last 2. November and December will be the last 2 episodes we cover at length. Probably 9 taped episodes, of course. How many newsletters that we have to break down and talk about the news. We're going to talk about the relationship between WWF and Smoky Mountain Wrestling, and the working relationship and the talent sharing, which something that we're going to see. And who knows who's going to appear on each side. Rumor and innuendo has it that Shawn Michaels appears on Smoky Mountain Wrestling to defend the IC title. We're going to see some of the other side of the WWF borrow some of the other talent. Of course, we're going to see some talent that goes on to do bigger and better things. Chris Jericho, Lance Storm, the Gangsters, New Jack and Mustafa. There's a lot of good talent here in Smoky Mountain Wrestling. I'm just curious to get into it. It's going to be a unique season. We're going to have a great time doing it. And we're going to get to you with Season 5 for a longer form. We're going to do 30 episodes of, we didn't announce it yet, so we'll talk about what it's going to be soon. It's like 95% locked in that we're doing it. So stay tuned for that, and I can't wait for it, and that's going to lead us through the summer. We're going to have a lot of good stuff. And by the time Season 5 is done, we'll be at episode, believe it or not, 100 of Shot of Nostalgia. Can't believe it. 100 straight weeks is hopefully where we're going to be sitting after Season 5 of this great evergreen content that we continue to enjoy, because at the end of the day, I just, history does repeat itself. There's a lot to be said about understanding the past is a good barometer of the future. And there's a lot of conversation that resonates true. And we can talk about the newsletter and some of the booking strategies and kind of predicting and forecasting what wrestling becomes. A lot of that is evident throughout all of 1998, 1996 when we did WCW, 1995 ECW. And I'm sure we're going to see some of that through 1994 Smoky Mountain Wrestling. So looking forward to going on the ride with you guys. It's been a blast. I appreciate the support. Thank you guys for supporting the Turnbuckle Tavern. Make sure you guys go to turnbuckletavern.com and make sure you guys like and subscribe and do whatever you can do and go out and buy a shirt from Pro Wrestling Tees. Most importantly, leave a review on Apple or Spotify. Check out everything we have to offer. We have shows for every type of fan you are. We have the Raw Down, which is Raw and SmackDown. Of course, we have the AEW Wrap-Up Show. We have the AEW Flagship that's audio only. We also have Fig Night. Go check out Fig Night that aired this week. Mike talking about his Vegas trip and breaking down everything that went down there. All the great inroads he made and revealing some of the stuff. And he was actually featured on the AEW Jazzwares Instagram page. Mike Belcaster had one hell of a trip. Can't wait to have him back next week to talk about all the things that he did and breaking down Survivor Series 1998 and getting back into the swing of things here on Shot Nostalgia. But you guys can also just quick shilling before we get out of here. Go to remarkablewrestling.com if you're looking to attend our next event. Space is the place too. Headlined by Gabriel Sky defending his title against Desmond Cole, the Big Boofa, going for the championship. It is a rematch from the Halloween Haunted Havoc match. My first ever show at Remarkable, so match holds a special place in my heart. Hopefully at this point when you're watching this, the replay of IWTV Danger Zone 2 by Remarkable Wrestling should be available. Made my commentary debut for a few matches, so can't wait to check that out. I was also, of course, ring announcing, so just support independent wrestling any way you can. If you guys are not local to New York, can't get in a car and come to Long Island for some of these events, support your local independent. Do some research, finding out some local talent, and check them out because it is the lifeblood of professional wrestling. For future memories, that's where it starts. But with that being said, I appreciate you guys watching, and we'll get back to you guys next week. Vince Russo's in my ear. He's saying goodbye.
You want raw? I'll get downright nasty.
We'll catch you guys next week. Shot Nostalgia.